Lighting is as good as it's gonna get today. Hey folks, my name is Jen, and today I'm going to do a recommendations video. So I haven't done one of these in a while, and when I've made them in the past, I've just really enjoyed them enjoyed making them because I like trying to give recommendations to people based on what they might be into or like your moods, like what you're looking for. So I really wanted to make another one. For a while I was thinking about doing like a manga recommendations video, but then I realized that the majority of my manga that I have read and own and enjoy, they might not be as readily available anymore, or they might be incredibly expensive because they're kind of older. So then got to thinking of my old noggin and came up with poetry books, because I can definitely recommend some poetry books. I have some recommendations based on just different stuff. So first off, let's see. First off, I can recommend a couple of different collections. If you're someone who doesn't really know where to start with poetry, it's just something that you are new to, or like the only stuff you ever read was random things in school and you find it really boring, I can recommend a couple of collections to ease your way into poetry. I think they both have a decent look at older, like classic poets, like stuff that you probably have read in school, as well as some other things that maybe you did, maybe you didn't, more modern poets and things like that. The first of these collections I can recommend was actually one of my textbooks from college, but it's From Totems to Hip Hop. It is a multicultural anthology of poetry across the Americas from 1900 to 2002. And this collection is edited by Ishmael Reed. And it has, as you can see, I've folded the corners down on quite a few of them. And what I like about this collection is that it groups it and then explains why it grouped it in these different like ways. So everything's kind of grouped by what the contents of the poem are. So there's nature and place, there is men and women, family, politics, heroes and sheroes, anti and otherwise, manifestos, and I like that there's a little bit of an explanation at the beginning of each section as to why, those sections are the sections and things. And yeah, it has a pretty good collection of various poets. It lists the whole bunch of them right here, everybody. Book. It is a big old range of poets that are within here. And well, I have to say I didn't enjoy all of the poems that are in here. I did, as you can see, really like a lot of them, and they've made a giant impression on me. And this was honestly one of my favorite textbooks from college. Although a lot of the textbooks that I had in college were pretty cool because it was all like writing and stuff that I was into. But yeah, this was a really fun one. So I think this is like a good, very varied and diverse like collection to kind of expand your poetry reading with. And then another one I feel like you can't go wrong with is Good Poems, and this is selected and introduced by Garrison Keillor. If you don't know who Garrison Keillor is, he's like a author. Or his writings about Lake Wobegon So if you've ever heard of like his like Woe Begone series, or I think one of them is named Lake Woe Begone, or Tales from Lake Woe Begone. Then there's Pontoon, which is one of his books I really enjoyed. And then he also was one of the hosts of the Prairie Home Companion, if that's like a radio show that you know anything about. They made a movie of it like years ago. That was interesting. But yeah, so he basically was given free range to pick what are good poems, and this is a fairly interesting collection too, fairly varied, of people across like the years. I will say it's not quite as diverse as this collection, but there is a good variety of poets through the ages. So I think these are a pretty good place to start if you don't really know what you're into yet. Then I will say, as far as like epic poetry goes, you can't go wrong with the Odyssey. Not this version though. This version that I have, it's very pretty. But this version kind of sucks because it's an older translation and it's also prose. I would highly recommend the actual epic poetry version. Let me pull up a picture here. This version. This is the version that I had in college that we used for one of my classes. It is the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition. The translator is Robert Fagles, and yeah, I would highly recommend that version because it is honestly more entertaining and reads a lot better than the prose version. And I mean, the Odyssey is an epic poem, so if you're looking for an epic poem, I would highly recommend the Odyssey. Now, if you were looking for like specific poets, like specific classical poets or poetry from an older time period, I have a couple of recommendations for that. Now, this is a collection of love poems. I do not recommend this collection because, frankly, I think it's kind of bad, but I can recommend a couple of poets from this collection. Emily Dickinson, for example, is a classic. And the fun thing about how her poems are set up is that for not all of them, but quite a few of her poems, the like way it's written and the way it flows. One of my teachers back in high school told us that you could basically sing some of her poems. For example, The Brain is Wider Than the Sky. You can actually sing that to the tune of Gilligan's Island, based on how the poem is set up and flows, and it is, yeah, I've just never forgotten that. So I think that her poems are maybe more accessible than, say, a lot of other poets of the like romantic age where things are just a wee bit too flowery. I think her poems are definitely some of the more accessible older ones. As far as like flowery poets go, I guess I could recommend Lord Byron. I personally am not someone who's very into the romantic poets in general. I just find Keats boring and Shelley extremely pretentious, especially considering how he treated his wife. I'm not really a big fan of that whole genre in general, just because sometimes it feels a little too over the top and fairly ridiculous. Like, Ode to a Grecian Urn makes me want to tear my eyelashes out. So yeah, it's not something that I really enjoy overall most of the time, but I do have to say that Lord Byron did know how to turn a phrase. Like, some of his poems can be a bit over the top, but they are very romantic, and I can see why he was considered to be a particularly titillating character back in the day, because some of them are like, I think they were basically he was like the Regency era, right? I think so. He's basically like the Regency era Casanova or something with the way he writes some of his love poems. So you can understand why he was a sometimes controversial and scintillating character back in the day, just based on certain things that he wrote and how he phrased some of his poems. So yeah, I think that's basically one of the only real romantic poets I could recommend, just because it's that genre is not something that I'm like super big into. I mean, unless you also count this gentleman, Robert Burns. I don't know if he technically counts or not, like the Romantic Age, but he is a Regency era poet. I have been doing some more reading into this collection for Feb Regency, and I can really recommend this if you are looking for more epic poems, because he has quite a few that are super long. Like, longer than I was expecting that they were going to be, in all honesty. His first section is poems and epistles, and yeah, they go on for a while. He has a song, there's also like a section called songs and ballads, and like, yeah, if you want to settle in with older, longer poems that are kind of dragged out, I would highly recommend this if you just want to like live in the poems. This would be an author you could definitely do that with. Overall, I think I'm more of a fan of his shorter poems, but his longer ones aren't too bad either. And he also had a delicious sense of humor that comes through here and there. So yeah, if you're also looking for poems that have some humor to them, I would also recommend this. This is largely written within Scots though, so if that's something that you're not very familiar with, or you, like me, have a slightly hard time deciphering some things. First of all, this is definitely a collection that you'd probably want to read out loud to yourself while you were reading it, because it might help, even though your Scottish accent would offend the entire country. Or you could do what I also did with this, which was look up people reading his poems so you can get a better sense as to the context overall of them. But if you're feeling a little bit adventurous and you definitely want to check out like a classical, like Regency era poet, you can't really go wrong with Robert Burns, especially his poems that describe Scotland are also really delightful. Other classic poets that you might have visited briefly in school, Shakespeare. I know Shakespeare is potentially a scary character because the language is definitely a barrier for those of us in the modern age, and it can be a little hard sometimes to get through his poems, but this is a collection of all of his sonnets, and I have read all of them, and honestly, out of all of them, I think the only ones I really enjoyed was, how many sonnets did he write? 154 sonnets. I honestly can say I only think I fully enjoyed about 25 of them. But that's, I mean, still a decent chunk. It can be a little scary overall, but if you get a collection like this, which wonderfully has footnotes down the bottom, so helpful, and definitely makes it a little more readable. He honestly has some very beautiful ones in here. I think everybody probably knows. Let me see if I can find it. At number 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Like, I think everybody probably knows that one. 116. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Everyone also probably knows Sonnet 29. Which honestly is one of my favorites as well. 130, my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. Let's see, number 29. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate. Several that I think everyone would recognize, because, again, school, movies. But yeah, I think if you are wanting to venture into Shakespeare, I feel like his sonnets are not a bad place to go. The other poems, well, one of my favorite poets is T.S. Eliot. And personally, I really love this collection. It has some of my favorites in it is The Wasteland, Prufrock, and Other Poems. I absolutely love the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. I think it is, like, it's one of my favorite poems of all time, basically. I'm also pretty partial to Rhapsody on a Windy Night, to Preludes, and actually, funnily enough, both of those have bits in it that were taken to make Memory, which is a song from Cats. So yeah, I really like those poems. Honestly, I'm not a fan of The Wasteland, but I think some of his other poems are really doing something very interesting, and some of them are really lyrical, and it's kind of interesting to take some time to really break down the different images he's like creating in his poems. But my introduction to him was actually through Old Possum's book of Practical Cats, which is where the majority of the songs from the musical Cats came from. I'm not kidding. So this is The Naming of Cats, The Old Gumby Cat, Rum Tum Tugger, who's like very popular, the Song of the Jellicles, Mungo Jerry and Rumple Teaser, who are like my two absolute favorite characters from the musical. The musical itself, not the new film. I absolutely refuse to watch the new film. It is a travesty. Mr. Mistopheles. Honestly, if I had had my way, my tuxedo cat Sakamoto would have been named Mr. Mistopheles, but I could not quite sell my husband on it. So he's Sakamoto, which honestly fits him very well. So if you've ever been interested in the story behind Cats, basically, they're funny poems. They were originally created for like T.S. Eliot's friends, but I know that this is often introduced to children just because it's funny poems about cats and they're really humorous and stuff like that. So I think if you like cats, this is a good place to start with him, but also a little collection like this is not a bad place either. I highly recommend The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock because it has some of the lines in it that I absolutely love, and honestly, I'm such a fucking nerd. Some of those lines were lines that I used to use as away messages on AIM because I'm a fucking nerd. Okay. And another kind of more academically classic poem that I can recommend that you should definitely try to check out is Robert Frost. If you enjoy nature poetry, or if you're someone who you like books about nature, I would highly recommend Robert Frost. Sometimes his poems mean more than the image he is creating in the nature scene. Sometimes there's metaphors involved, but a lot of the times it's also fairly simple and mostly fairly obvious as to what kind of message he is trying to get across, which I think is also really helpful if you're someone who has a hard time gleaning what the message or the metaphors and things are from poems in general. I think he's a fairly good poet for that, because for the most part he does mean what he says. But if it's a situation in which he means a little bit more, like there's more going on underneath the surface, it's still fairly easy to figure out what he's trying to get across. Even if you're someone who's not partial to poetry, I feel like The Road Not Taken is just one that people automatically know because your grandparents probably had it framed up on the wall, or somebody's read it at your graduation, or it's just a very well-known poem, and I mean, it's honestly one of my favorites as well. But want more simpler poetry, or you would like to read more about nature, like nature poetry, you can't go wrong with Robert Frost. Also, if you're interested, he is buried in Bennington, Vermont, in a old, very old graveyard in Old Bennington. My friends and I went to see his grave once. It was slightly spooky, but pretty cool. Okay, as far as like what I would glean more modern poets, I have a few here that I can recommend. Speaking of poems where, for the most part, the poet is saying what they mean immediately outward, there's no like hidden things that you're trying to like scour through the poems for. Billy Collins. Really accessible, fairly hilarious a lot of the time, and just all around really good. I have another one of his collections, Aimless Love, but I would honestly recommend The Rain in Portugal a little more, because while Aimless Love does have some truly beautiful poems in there, including a couple of my favorite poems, overall there's a lot going on in that poem, that collection, that is a little more depressing. And this collection is a little lighter overall, and I think if this is someone that you're like being introduced to, maybe start with like something like this. Or he has another collection that's also really popular called Sailing Around the Room. That one is also, like, I highly recommend that collection as well. It's really great. And yeah, he's one of our poet laureates here in the US. He was several years ago. Oh, I can't remember when he was the poet laureate, but he was ages ago. But yeah, I highly recommend checking out his poetry because he is a little more accessible, he's really funny, and he has some truly beautiful thoughts that he is expressing. And also this collection is fairly thin, so it's not such a slog if you're looking just for like an introduction. Other poets. Well, recently I read Call Us What We Carry by Amanda Gorman, and I also think this is an incredibly beautiful collection and has some, again, really beautiful, important thoughts. I would warn you here that this deals heavily with COVID-19 and like the events of 2020 and 2021. So if you are mentally and emotionally not there yet, maybe wait a little while until you are. But it is a collection that I think is really beautiful, and I really enjoy a lot of what she's done here too, with like different poetry, poem forms and things that she's done and played around with. I think it's honestly a collection that is really worth checking out. Okay, that was a quick break for Duncan. Okay, so on to more modern books, collections, things, poets. Okay. Another book that I really love that does some very interesting things, like plays around with stuff a little bit. Not so much like form, but like overall ideas, is I'll Fly Away by Rudy Francisco. I will also highly recommend Helium, which is his first like poetry collection. I really love that one as well, and I think that a lot of the poems in that collection are easily recognizable if you've seen his videos, and on YouTube if you watch like button poetry videos. He's featured fairly often in there. He is one of my favorite living poets. I just absolutely adore his work. And yeah, I really love what he does here with I'll Fly Away. He has some incredibly powerful poems in here. He has a couple that he does play around with, like the erasure poems. And something really interesting that he does in this particular collection is he uses words. He creates words, as it says here. He has created his own words for the things we cannot give name to. And what he does with this work is he will give a word. For example, this word is nolexi, a word or phrase that does not exist or has no direct translation in a particular language. Yeah, he throws these words in here and there, and then has poems that kind of relate to these different words and the definitions that he has made for these words, and it's so interesting and inventive, and like I said, he writes some truly beautiful, powerful poems, and I just absolutely love this collection. I love both of his collections, in all honesty, and also you should definitely check out his videos because they're just so good. They're so good. But yeah, if you are looking for something that's a little playful but also absolutely beautiful, I would definitely go with his collection. And yeah, an easy way of seeing if you will be into his works is looking at some of his poems. I will find a video of my personal favorite, and I'll link that video down below so you can kind of get an idea of like what his work is like. And another poet who again also has a lot of like videos out there of her work is Sarah Kay. This collection is No Matter the Wreckage, and this is also a beautiful collection. If you have read any of her works before, if you've seen videos of that, this is like a collection of those works. I also own a couple of like illustrated versions of some of them. B is my absolute favorite poem of hers. This, I would say, also is full of incredibly beautiful words and powerful imagery and messages and just absolutely gorgeous poems. Again, she is another one. She's my other favorite living poet. Yeah, favorite living poets? Yeah, it's these guys and Billy Collins. Just absolutely adore them. I'll also leave a link to one of her poems down below so you can see. This other one, so I feel weird about recommending this one just because I have only ever found this one copy in a secondhand store down the Cape, and when I brought it up to the front, the clerk at the store was actually like, "Oh, you can just have that one." I bought I want to say 2 or 3 other books, and this book she was like, "Oh yeah, you can just have it." So I don't know the story behind this. I have tried to look up this book. I've tried to look up this poet. I can find nothing about it. The only conclusion I have come to is this person produced this collection themselves. I'm assuming there is not that many copies in general, and I don't even know if this just naturally ended up in the secondhand shop or if this person just shoved it onto a stack in there and that's why the clerk was so confused about it and said I could have it for free. I legitimately do not know. So I don't know if this is a collection that would be readily available for anyone. But yeah, it is called The Hermit, Worth a Single Penny, which is kind of why it was amusing that I actually got it for free. But it's by Ian Ramsey Croft. I feel kind of weird recommending it too because this is absolutely bizarre. It is the weirdest thing that I have ever read, and I've read some pretty weird things. I don't know what's up with this collection, what's up with this author. I am not 100% sure, but it does some very funky things here with the poems. I don't know if this person just found a very interesting way of expressing their emotions, because it says that this is dedicated to anyone who has felt the insanity of love, loss, and have confronted the truths. So, I don't know if this is what someone did in the throes of strong emotion, or if this person is, potentially certifiable. I mean, I feel bad kind of saying that, but some of this stuff in here is absolutely bonkers, and it ranges from, I can't tell if it's all different poems or if they're all just one long thought basically, but it's very interesting, and at times there's sections of it that are wow, that hits you right in the gut, and then there's other sections that's I would not want to meet this person in a dark alley because I think they might want to wear my skin as a suit. It is the weirdest thing that I've ever read. And like I said, I don't know if there's any other copies in the world or where they might be or what, so I feel weird recommending it, but it's just, if maybe not if you can't find this specifically. I would say that in the vein of finding weird things to read, even if you can't find this specific piece of work, I would say trolling your local secondhand shops, or if you're on like a trip like I was when I found this, if you're on a trip and you stop at a secondhand shop, go in there and look at their poetry sections, because you can find the strangest shit in the poetry section, and sometimes things fall flat and sometimes things are amazing, and sometimes you have something that you have had for a decade, like I have had this, I think, and it still absolutely befuddles you as to how you were supposed to read this and how you were supposed to feel about it. Yeah, so I guess maybe I'm not necessarily recommending this exact collection because, like I said, I don't know how many copies there are of this and whether you can find this. But I would, however, recommend the idea of, if you want to take a weird exploration into poetry, look for the weird stuff. Look for the self-published, look for the very interesting collections, because sometimes they will really surprise you and sometimes they will just blow your mind, whether in a good or a bad way. But it will be an experience anyway. And if you guys are intrigued by this at all, let me know, because I don't know how to explain this book, but I'm kind of thinking about it would be an interesting thing to make a video flipping through this book, like actually going through this whole collection, crediting the author, of course, however I can. There is like they do have an email address. So, yeah. But let me know if you're interested in me going more in depth and doing a flip through with you guys about this book, because it's very interesting, and I kind of want to know what other people think about it as well. Or if you know this person, first of all, I'm sorry I kind of accused that person of wanting to wear a human suit, but yeah, let me know, because this has befuddled me since I read this like years ago. Just absolutely confused and entertained me. And I'm interested in the backstory on the writer, but yeah. Okay, the last couple of things that I could recommend. First of all, childhood poetry. I feel like if you are someone who you're looking for a way to introduce your children to poetry, or you yourself have this, little child soul still living inside you, and you are just looking for something a little more humorous or fun, playful, silly even, I would, of course, recommend any of the books by Shel Silverstein. He was an awesome poet, and this is one of his collections that I own, A Light in the Attic. This has some pretty good poems in it. There's also Where the Sidewalk Ends, which also has some wonderful books within it. There's also, let's see, The Giving Tree. I mean, everybody knows The Giving Tree. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of that one, but I do like his poetry collections themselves. And I think they have a lot of fun stuff in there. And there's a lot of interesting things that he does. Like he's just trying to purely entertain children mostly with a lot of his poems, but there's also poems where it's Like, he's definitely making some type of societal observance, or trying to teach you maybe a little something, and I find all of them to be pretty delightful. Also, fun fact, he is also an often banned poet, which is absolutely ridiculous. Clearly, those people have had no joy in their childhoods or lives, because, like, come on. How can you really go wrong about, for example, a poem about wild strawberries, in which the wild strawberry is maybe kind of dangerous? Or this, where apparently a child can grow a mustache and use that as a swing. And like, there's just some really interesting things in here. For example, this one that I think is pretty great is called The Oak and the Rose. And it says, an oak tree and a rose bush grew, young and green together, talking the talk of growing things, wind and water and weather. And while the rose bush sweetly bloomed, the oak tree grew so high that now it spoke of newer things, eagles, mountain peaks, and sky. I guess you think you're pretty great, the rose was heard to cry, screaming as loud as it possibly could to the treetop in the sky. And you have no time for flower talk now that you've grown so tall. It's not so much that I've grown, said the tree, it's just that you've stayed so small. And so you have something like that that is just so monumental. And then you turn the page and we have, they've put a brassiere on the camel. It's almost like a whiplash, I guess, in a sense, between things that are so beautiful and deep, and then on the next page something absolutely ridiculous. But I find his collections to be so fun, and they're very nostalgic for me, because this was honestly, yeah, I think Shel Silverstein was my introduction to poetry as a kid. Yeah, it was basically Shel Silverstein and Roald Dahl's poems. That was my intro to poetry. I don't even think I'd read Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats yet. I think I read that a little bit later in elementary school. So, like, these have a very nostalgic feel to me, and I think that if this is also something you read as a kid and you'd like to, like, go down memory lane with it, I highly recommend it. If you just want something that's a little bit funnier or lighter, while at the same time having pretty, like, you know, big thoughts sometimes in the poems, or if you want to introduce your kids to poetry, I don't think you can really go wrong with Shel Silverstein. And then the last, like, poetry related things that I like to talk about are something that is a fairly recent discovery of mine, fairly recent as in within the past couple of years, and that has been books in verse. So the most recent book in verse that I have read is The Ghosts of Rose Hill by R.M. Romero, and this is dealing with a lot of things. There's like the main character is just trying to basically be able to find the strength to be who she wants to be and do what she wants to do with her life. She would really love to be a musician. She wants to play the violin professionally. Her parents desperately want her to give up on something like that. They want her to pick something more stable that is going to make her lots of money, like a doctor, a lawyer, etc. And so she is dealing with that. She is also dealing with discovering this world of the supernatural when she is sent to stay with her aunt in Prague, and discovers an abandoned Jewish cemetery, which she starts cleaning up, and then finds a ghost and finds that there's magic within the city, and there's a powerful, mysterious figure that desperately wants her music. There's like a lot going on in here. There's a lot about like history and the impact that the history and the Holocaust has still left on the people, especially people in Prague within this city. And then there's also like the supernatural stuff, there's ghost stuff, there's at the root of it the main character wanting to trying to figure out if she can try to be who she wants to be. And I think this is like, if you're looking for something more fantastical in your poetry and you want to check out like a book in verse, I think this is a pretty good place to start. But I would personally also highly recommend Elizabeth Acevedo's writing, specifically her 2 books in verse. There's Clap When You Land, and the one that's like my favorite, which is The Poet X. And this is following Xiomara, who is basically questioning a lot of things. She's a teenage girl who is being kind of sheltered, and she wants to be a writer. She wants to be a poet. She writes a lot of poetry, and her digging into the poetry and writing it is like her like digging through things in her life. It's her working out how she feels about stuff, how she feels about boys and wanting to date but being sheltered by her parents, not really being given that chance, how she feels about her home life and the religion that she was brought up in. She's brought up Catholic, but she's questioning a lot of things. She doesn't know if she believes everything. She doesn't want to get confirmed. She doesn't want to like, you know, be on this path anymore. She's questioning things. She wants to strike out on her own, like that kind of thing. Is dealing with a lot of that, and being encouraged to join her school's like poetry slam, and just a lot. There's a lot going on in this too, and I think it's just so beautiful. And if you were that kind of teenager that was like struggling or questioning things or pushing back basically at how you were raised and different things like that, I think if that's where you are, or if that's where you were at some point, I think you could find this very relatable. I had so many like such a range of emotions while I was reading this, from just being blown away by the poetry to just relating so much to the main character, and it was just such a great experience. So if you are interested in picking up checking out like what a book in verse is exactly, I would recommend one of these, and especially just Elizabeth Acevedo's writing. Like her writing is so gorgeous and so incredibly gorgeous. And Clap When You Land, which is her other book in verse, I would also highly recommend that one as well, because it does deal with a event that took place, a plane crash that took place right around when September 11th happened, but because that had recently happened, there wasn't as much like coverage of this plane crash, which is sad. So that's also a really important topic, and a really great first book as well. But yeah, I feel like I might be forgetting something or not really thinking of something that I should. This is, of course, just purely going off of like poetry that I own, poetry that I've loved enough to own copies. So if there are any poetry books that you could recommend, poets that you think, just from what I said, that I might also enjoy, you think I should check out, let me know. Let me know also if you have read any of these books, if you like any of these poets. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for always watching. If you are new here and would like to subscribe, please consider doing so, and I will see you guys in the next video.